back and then we're ready to start. But if you are watching us live on YouTube and you want to get more briefings like this with journalists, newsmakers, and here comes the feedback, thought leaders, subscribe and like, and you'll get a notification when the next live comes. You'll also get a link for where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, or actually it's not iTunes anymore. It's called Apple Podcasts. I'm showing my age. And Spotify, which is now, a bastion for podcasting as well. They've been snapping up podcasting companies far and wide. So we are live. We are rolling. I am going to get on. Actually, I'm going to let the garbage truck pass, and then we're going to start. So you hear it? There we are. We're in the city too, It's not a tall city, but it's a wide city. Saul Isaac is a false start. Saul Isaac is a politics reporter who grew up in suburban Pennsylvania and has lived and reported all over the world. He's written for Daily Mail, Huffington Post, New York Daily News, Vox, and many others. But these days he runs a Substack newsletter called Tangle. I'm a subscriber. It's an independent, ad-free, nonpartisan political newsletter that he distributes on Substack, which is a newsletter distribution platform that's all the rage right now with built-in e-commerce that you can use to essentially build an audience and generate income. Saul, welcome to the Earned Media Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. And I have to apologize to you because I set you up for failure here. I'm looking at my Zoom screen and I have my own first and last name backwards here as Saul Isaac, which is why you're calling me Saul Isaac. But my name's actually Isaac Saul. And this happens literally everywhere I go because I have two first and last names, which makes life really difficult.
Well, I have a better story for you. So on my sister podcast, this is the Earned Media Podcast, we talk about digital PR. And then we have a digital marketing podcast called the B2B Lead Gen Podcast. I recently had the CEO of Yoast, which is the #1 SEO plugin for WordPress on, and she's Dutch. And her name is Marika. And by the end of the episode, I was Marika. I was hacking it up. So I owe her a big apology for that. At least I can pronounce your name.
Yeah.
So Isaac Saul, welcome to the Earned Media Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super stoked to be here and really excited to talk about some of the stuff that's happening in the media world right now.
Awesome. So today, in this episode, the state of political journalism, finding an audience without a network backbone, and exploding media technology platforms in 3 acts with our guest, Isaac Saul. Stay with us. Act 1. During the Trump administration, every day was a hard news day, with something unprecedented to report daily. Ratings were up across the board for all the cable news networks, but that's no longer the case, right? Regardless of your politics, I think it's fair to say that the Biden administration is much more predictable and much more well-behaved. We're here with Isaac Saul, who founded and runs a growing nonpartisan political newsletter. Let me try that again. False start at 12:04. We're here with Isaac Saul, who founded and runs a growing nonpartisan political newsletter on Substack called Tangle. And first question, Isaac, I imagine that launching a political newsletter during the Trump administration was a particularly smart move. Yeah, was it? I mean, did it help?
Yes. I think it helped tremendously. I think there are 2 things happening. One is there is a strong growing distrust for the mainstream media. Mostly when people talk about that, they talk about how that exists on the right. My experience interacting with readers and promoting my own work is that distrust also exists on the left for different reasons. And maybe people are less outspoken about it. But there was no shortage of anything to write about. And the engagement from readers leading up to the election was unbelievable. I mean, I started my newsletter in August of 2019. So right as the Democratic primaries were really starting to heat up, and being in that space and that timing of it meant that the people who were coming in to read were really dialed in every day. And I've seen that in the metrics of the newsletter. I mean, up until January, I would see 50 to 60% open rates on every newsletter I sent, with an audience of nearly 20,000 people. And that has come down pretty steadily up till now, maybe 6 to 10 percentage points since the election, or since the inauguration, really, which I think is reflective of the fact that some people are sort of stepping back a little bit right now with the Biden administration in office.
When you were working at the Daily Mail and HuffPo and New York Daily News and Vox, was politics always your beat?
Yeah, so I've actually, as a full-time reporter, HuffPost was the only of those places that I've worked for. The others were freelancing and, writing regularly, but always politics. In the very beginning of my career, I was sort of just like a viral news writer trying to drive traffic. But typically, national politics has been my beat. I've carved out a special interest, I think, in a few specific areas like policing and immigration are things that I tend to write about a little bit more than other stuff. But now with Tangle, I mean, it's a national politics newsletter, and I sort of decide what I'm going to write about based on what is dominating the opinion pages of the most read websites and newspapers in the country. So I go where the conversation's going, and I think as a result have like a pretty broad view and perspective of what's happening in the country. I definitely feel more comfortable in certain places than others, but national politics for sure is my beat.
So tell us about Tangle. What is it?
Sure. So Tangle is a daily newsletter. I send it out Monday through Thursday to free subscribers. Anybody who wants to try it can sign up and get 4 days a week totally free. And the concept of the newsletter is really simple. You're going to get views from across the political spectrum on whatever the big story of the day is. So the format of the newsletter is that I will lead off with what DC is talking about. And that's sort of what I was just referencing. What's the big buzz about? What's the chatter about? So we're chatting today. It's Wednesday, April 21st. And the big news is obviously the verdict in the Derek Chauvin case. So that was what the newsletter was about. And then after that section, that's sort of just the main facts, I do a roundup of maybe 2 or 3 columns from conservative writers. So it'll say what the right is saying, and then it'll be snippets of perspectives, arguments being crafted by, dominant thinkers in the conservative world, and then what the left is saying. So same thing, just a mirror image of that, sort of a collection of all these opinions that are being written by people with lefty politics, and then my take, which is my sort of reaction and reflection to the arguments and where I kind of land. If I take a position, I take it. If I don't, I just sort of lay out what I'm seeing and try and add some context to the arguments that are there. And then that's really the meat. That's the heart of the newsletter. That's what people sign up for. I also answer a reader question in every newsletter, do a story that matters, which is kind of like what's fallen under the radar, what's a really important story that has been, overlooked because of whatever everybody's chattering about. That's usually education, addiction, healthcare, stuff that's like really impacting people every day. And then a numbers section. And then the last thing in the newsletter is a good news story, a have a nice day section. That's just like something a little positive to wash it all down.
Wow, that's a huge amount of content to do every day. Tell us about your editorial production schedule.
Yeah, so I write about 3,000 to 4,000 words every day, and I've been doing that for almost 2 years. I work pretty much nonstop. I wake up at 5 or 6 in the morning every day, and basically roll out of bed into my office chair and start reading and writing. And I work right up until the bell. 6 hours straight until the newsletter goes out at noon Eastern. Which is sort of another little quirk of the newsletter. A lot of news organizations do morning newsletters. I sort of own the lunch hour. That's my thing. I believe that a lot of the morning stuff misses some of the most interesting commentary. And I like seeing how it sort of shakes out and what the discussion is throughout the morning, because I'm sort of trying to give people a holistic view of what's going on. And I think typically at 6 a.m., we don't really have a clear view. And yeah, and then I send the newsletter out, and then right at 12, I start thinking about what I'm going to do the next day. So, from 12 till the end of the day, 5 or 6 o'clock, I'm preparing and working and researching on the next newsletter. On good days when I sort of have a couple of days in advance lined up, I'll be working ahead of schedule. But yeah, it's 8 to 10 hours probably spent on each newsletter. I have a research assistant, an intern. I have 2 or 3 editors who are, give me an hour or two every morning of their time. One of them's a copy editor. One of them is my father, who is a very good writer and basically just reads through the newsletter and corrects my grammar. And then the other one is basically a close friend who's one of the smartest people I know. And he reads the newsletter and tries to point out where he thinks my arguments are basically not up to snuff. So I get like the copy edit, the general edit, and then like the logical punch holes in my argument part from a friend. And I sort of adjust for the last couple hours of the newsletter, and then I send it out right at noon.
But you're not worried about sequencing? Like you don't want to go to your dad last and make sure that any changes that get made, he catches? Or
It's interesting you say that. What usually happens is I write all of this in Substack, which is the platform I use. Then I copy and paste it into a Google Doc, and then I share it with all 3 of them at once, which is really fun to be, 4 of us in the document. Everybody's leaving comments. There's edits. I'm accepting. We're changing it. We're moving stuff around. And it's very collaborative. And it's this kind of 2 or 3 hours where the base newsletter is there, and then we're all sort of building it and sort of massaging it as a team, which is pretty fun.
have you ever had any difficulties with Substack losing your copy because it's a web-based platform?
No, Substack's great. There's all sorts of controversy and, questions about what the best newsletter platforms are and different things around, whether Substack is right for people. I personally have had a fantastic experience on Substack. It auto saves basically every time you make a change in the newsletter. So it's pretty hard to lose anything unless your internet's down and you don't notice, which has happened to me before. But no, usually that process is pretty easy. And I have used a lot of different back ends in my time as a writer, and theirs is very slick, very easy to use. And the autosave feature is hot. I mean, every time you type a letter, it saves it. So that's a pretty nice thing to have.
I do want to talk more about technology, but first, tell me. I want to talk about the editorial personality of Tangle. If Tangle was a person, what kind of person would she be?
It's an interesting question. I don't think I've answered that question before. I would say empathetic is probably like the number one. I mean, my personality is that I have a deep empathy for people from across the political spectrum. I believe politics is informed by people's experiences they've had in their lives. And, I think what people have gone through and what they've seen with their own 2 eyes will always be more influential to them than data or information or reality or fact checks. None of that stuff can hold a candle to what people experience in their day-to-day lives. And so I try to write from a place of empathy. I grew up in a very politically diverse place with a lot of people who are friends of mine and family, close people to me that I love, who have politics across the spectrum. And I was in part inspired to start Tangle because I saw those people begin to hate each other when I didn't think they had to. And so I think it's definitely rooted in empathy, open-mindedness, and, a political incongruency, I like to say. I mean, my people, the question I get from readers most often is, what are your politics? Because I'm featuring a lot of other people's writing. So everybody always wants to know, are you a liberal? Are you a conservative? And, it's sort of a cop out, but it's also very true that my answer is I'm politically incongruent. It depends what the issue is. I have no interest in saying I'm a liberal or a conservative. I have no loyalty to the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. I think, conservative values are sometimes useful. I think liberal values are sometimes useful. I have feelings about what politicians I think are doing better work than others, and I express those openly. That's like, my take in the newsletter is my take. I try and be honest about what my biases are. So yeah, I mean, I would say empathetic, open-minded, and transparent. I mean, radically transparent. That is, I am trying to also solve for the trust in media issues. So for instance, I keep a running tally of every correction that I make in the newsletter. So if I publish something that's an error in the newsletter, somebody writes in and says, hey, you said, 20 million people are unemployed. Actually, it's 14 million. The next day, I will, at the top of the newsletter, not in like a bottom footnote, the very first thing you'll see in the newsletter is a correction. I'll explain the error. I'll explain exactly how it happened in the editing process. And then I'll say, this was the 42nd Tangle correction in its 200-week history. And we track corrections in an effort to create transparency with our readers. And that was something I was very scared to do, but people really love it. It's one of the most popular and well-received parts of the newsletter. I also share reader feedback pretty much every day. So if you write in and criticize something I wrote, or how I formulated a sentence in the newsletter, you'll be one of many people who do that, but there's a chance that I will feature your feedback in the next day's newsletter. So I try and share kind of dissenting opinions every day, just because, I'm one person, and I think there are a lot of views and perspectives out there, and I don't have I don't own the truth.
We're in this environment where these social media algorithms show you more of the same and put you in this kind of bubble filter and sort of reinforce your existing beliefs rather than challenging them. And I wonder what that's meant for you, because you're sort of trying to toe the middle of the aisle, but the algorithms don't work that way. The algorithms either put you on the right or the left. So do you have a sense of how that's worked out for you?
Yeah. So I don't get much of any traffic from Facebook or Twitter or any place like that. It does not work well for me. And my goal and my perspective on what Tangle is doing is that I am taking people out of their bubbles and out of their echo chambers. I am in part trying to break that cycle, and the fact that most people I know log onto social media and they get nothing but views and tweets and posts that reinforce their political beliefs. So I don't rely on Facebook for traffic. I don't rely on Twitter for traffic. I rely entirely on word of mouth. I've grown Tangle from 50 subscribers to 21,000 daily readers in less than 2 years by asking people to send it to their friends who they think would like it. And, I've had occasional tweets that have gone viral or posts that have caught fire, but it's very rare because of the format of the newsletter and because of, what I'm trying to do. I don't want to participate in that. I think it's extremely toxic. I think it's part of why the media ecosystem and the discourse in our country is broken right now. So I am doing everything I can to not be incentivized by those algorithms, because I think they're a big part of the problem.
Isaac, I recently interviewed atmospheric scientist Michael Mann, PhD. He's the guy who pretty much woke the world up to the relationship between carbon emissions and climate change. And, after I published that issue, that episode on my blog, I had a full frontal assault from the fossil fuel industry, from, their PR people and their industry front groups. I mean, it was clearly an assault against science with all sorts of information. And my feeds were quickly populated with all sorts of ridiculous and threatening comments, right? But when I look at your comment fields under your stories, they're pretty tame, right? So how do you keep your comment kiosk from attracting, lies and smears?
Well, first of all, Michael Mann is a really interesting, smart guy. I've had the privilege of interviewing him myself. We go back. So that's really cool that you spent some time with him. I think he's he's doing honest work, and I appreciate a lot of this stuff and a lot of the science he's putting out there. The short answer is that you can't comment on my newsletters unless you're a paying subscriber. The comment section is locked to the public. So it's really the people who are invested in what the newsletter's mission is and invested in being exposed to views that they might not agree with who are allowed to comment. And that is a really, really effective way to sort of filter out the trolls and the people who are just coming in there to, be divisive. It's not foolproof. I have plenty of readers who are paying readers who I am not fans of how they sort of handle themselves in the online discourse, but regardless of their political beliefs, I think that they respect me enough to be mostly respectful in the comments. And I have never to this day had to ban anyone or delete any comments or block anything because, nobody's paying $50 a year just to troll on the comments of a newsletter. If they're paying, it's because they're genuinely interested in the content. And most people who are doing that are, fairly open-minded and even-keeled, and they're interested in having a real discourse and learning something. They want to be challenged and be exposed to views they might not agree with.
We're talking to Isaac Saul. He is the founder of Tangle. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the competitive media landscape and how it's changing. Stay with us. Act 2. When it comes to physical news media products like newspapers and magazines, the internet eviscerated that barrier to entry. Buying ink by the barrel is no longer a competitive advantage for media companies. The internet literally erased the most mainstream print news media. False start 12/22. The internet literally erased the moat mainstream print news media enjoyed, and the growth of over-the-top TV and streaming video on demand could further marginalize cable news for young audiences who have already cut the cord. Our guest is Isaac Saul. He is the founder of the nonpartisan news political newsletter he runs on Substack called Tangle. Saul, why did you decide? I mean, you've written for Daily Mail, you've written for HuffPo, you've written for big established media brands. Why did you decide to fly solo and publish your own newsletter?
Really simple. This one was really straightforward for me because I learned pretty early on that people would take my reporting or my writing seriously, but based solely on where I was publishing it and not what I was writing. So if I put up a column in the Huffington Post, that column was not going to be read or taken seriously by anyone with center or right of center political views. If I wrote something for the Independent Journal Review or got interviewed on Fox News, there was nobody in the liberal world, nobody left of center who was going to take what I wrote seriously or, care enough to examine it with an open mind. And I found that out the hard way. My first job in news, my first journalism job was at Huffington Post. And I did not go work for the Huffington Post as a 22-year-old because I was like a diehard, bleeding heart liberal. It was because I got a job there, and getting a job at a media organization is really hard. And I applied to 70 media organizations and I got one job. And so I took it. And when I left Huffington Post and started writing for other places, I quickly saw that, in the comments section of the articles, in the responses to my tweets, people would just say, oh, this guy worked at HuffPost, that liberal rag. He's just, he's just another lib. And that tag stuck with me. It stuck with me to this day. And so I got really tired of and frustrated with being pegged to the institutions or the brands that I was writing for, because I didn't want to be represented by them. I wanted my writing and my arguments to stand on their own. So that was first and foremost. The reason that I chose Substack and newsletters and how it happened was more about another symptom of the media ecosystem, which is that I was working at a company called A Plus, a sort of solutions oriented media outlet where we kind of wrote some feel good, positive stories about things that were working. And I was on the politics beat there. And we were bought by Chicken Soup for the Soul Entertainment, who basically turned the news website into a video shop. We did like the pivot to video with Facebook and a lot of the other players in the media. And so I sort of had the cord cut on my writing and my political reporting, and I didn't have an outlet. I was writing video scripts instead of writing articles and columns and doing political reporting that I wanted to do. And so I was looking for a place to do my writing. So I started Tangle and started on Substack while I had a full-time job as an editor. And it was in the beginning, it was sort of like a side project that I was experimenting with. But I chose Substack instead of freelancing or anything else because I wanted that independence. I wanted it to just be mine.
So I recently interviewed Tonya Reese, executive director at Edelman, about the 2021 Trust Barometer report, which, if you're aware of it, it tracks trust in journalism and all sorts of sources for media elites, people who consume a lot of media, and that's a shrinking audience, media elites and media. One of the things they talk about is people who have good media hygiene, and they describe that as people who look at multiple sources and then make their own opinion based on, having consulted the left and the right and the center. Some people will go to the All Kinds Media website to sort of figure out who's left, right, and center, and then listen to a few and make up their mind. But those with old school media literacy, like, myself from the newspaper days, there was always a very hard difference between opinion and news. Like, it was actually a separate section in the newspaper with a separate staff reporting to a separate editor. And, now you think about cable news, you've got the same anchors and personalities reading the news and delivering opinion from the same desk with really no disclosure at all. And I wonder if you think, figuring that out and disclosing opinion versus news is even possible. And if it is it a problem that can be fixed?
It's tough, and it's a huge issue. I mean, media literacy generally is a big problem in the country. I think, even at the paper of record at the New York Times, they have blurred the lines between news and opinion by having analysis pieces, which I read and often think, I don't know if this isn't a news story. This is an opinion piece that's being, sort of pegged to the news team by falling under this sort of in-between category of analysis. And I, as a journalist, sometimes struggle to understand, where mainstream news outlets are drawing that line. And so I can't imagine just being a casual media consumer who's trying to do that. And I, my belief is that the only way to fix it is to sort of have that radical transparency, which is what I'm trying to do with Tangle. And that's saying explicitly, these are like, this is news and this is not. And, obviously these papers and these websites, they're labeling stuff opinion or they're labeling it news, but, you look at like the home pages of these news outlets online, and it's hard to tell sometimes. I mean, it's hard to tell what headlines are being drawn as fact and what headlines are being drawn as opinion. The analysis stuff or the media commentary is sort of like this weird in-between space that I don't really understand. And I think it's a huge challenge. I think there's a crisis right now of trust in media. And, I think the New York Times or the Washington Post, the fact that they've been pegged as left-leaning is both dangerous and illustrative of the fact that their news teams have sort of lost the plot a little bit. And at the same time, I look at the Wall Street Journal, which the news team at the Wall Street Journal, I think, does some of the best reporting in the country. I wake up and the first paper I open in the morning is the Wall Street Journal. And I think their hard news section is still doing incredibly balanced reporting, but the opinion section is so far right and, plays into so much of the culture war stuff that you can't really find a honest liberal or progressive who reads the Wall Street Journal anymore, even though they're choosing to cover a lot of stories that I think are really important. So it's not just that it blurs the line between opinion and news. It's also that the opinion sections turn away potential readers for the news sections, which I think is really dangerous and not good. I mean, it just contributes to the siloing of views and perspectives that we have already.
Dan, where does most of your traffic come from? How do you get subscribers?
I would say most of my traffic comes from promoting the newsletter on Twitter. I have, 30,000 followers or something on Twitter. So a modest but strong following where if I tweet something that catches fire, I can get like a new audience and then peg a promotion to the newsletter to that. But honestly, I mean, that's like outside of Tangle. That's where the most traffic comes from. But it's really, I ask readers to share the newsletter. I mean, if I look at my stats in Substack's back end, it'll say like direct is the biggest traffic driver, which means it's people being forwarded the newsletter and then clicking into Tangle and going straight to the website, something
Maybe.
like that. Yeah,
Maybe.
it's a hard thing to track.
Yeah.
And Substack stats on that stuff are not the best. And so I will say, like, I'm definitely shooting blind a little bit, but I can see for sure that people are sharing. Like, I can see when people press the share button in the newsletter and post something on social media or share it and email it to people. And that is still the number one way that I get new subscribers, is just through that word of mouth.
Do you get pitched by PR people?
Sometimes. And I don't know if that's because they think they're going to get into Tangle as much as that's just because my emails are on so many lists from being a reporter, that I'm just getting people popping into my inbox. But yeah, I'll get pitches most commonly for people who want to get something in the have a nice day section, something like that. They, their company did something really good and they think, hey, your subscribers might be interested in this feel good story. That's probably like the most common thing I hear.
Years ago, I interviewed Danny Levy, who founded Daily Candy. That was an email subscription newsletter she sold to Comcast for $125 million. And the Hustle newsletter has an audience of 1.5 million. What are your goals for Tangle?
It's a good question. The Hustle actually promoted Tangle, which was awesome. I shot them a cold call email and just said, hey, I think your readers would dig this. And their content team subscribed and read the newsletter for a week. And then they just promoted it. They gave us a shout out in Tangle, totally free. I mean, I know people pay thousands of dollars for a placement in there. So I was really excited about that. And I respect what they're doing a lot. I think the Hustle is, aside from the morning brew, it's sort of like the creme de la creme of newsletters. My goal is, well, first of all, my goal was to create a lucrative journalism career for myself, because I don't think it's possible in a lot of ways to make good money in media anymore unless you are, the top dog at the Washington Post and the New York Times or Fox News or MSNBC or whatever, or an anchor, which I have no interest in being. And I've done that. I make more off my newsletter than I do at any job I've ever gotten in the media world before. So that was a goal that I was really excited to accomplish. And, I think my dream world, 5-10 years from now is that I am in that upper hundreds of thousands, close to 1 million readers every day, free readers who are taking in a diverse set of views and opinions. If I could scale what I have now to 20,000 paying subscribers and be making, high six figures, low seven figures a year, I could hire and build out a team with diverse ideological backgrounds, 5 or 6 people. What I would want, what my dream would be, to have a small, really well-paid team with no red tape that's just working together every day to produce like a really, really good, strong piece of content every morning that people are going to want to read and be excited to read. I have just started to build out a podcast. I have about 9 episodes. So that's been a really fun project for me. I'm just interviewing guests who I think are interesting in the political world now, but I'm going to expand that into readings of the newsletter every day. So we're going to get into the audio world more and maybe create a different revenue stream that way. And then I'm looking at YouTube, which is still the most popular social media, quote unquote, network. I mean, it's the most popular place people get news and information from. And I think creating videos on YouTube in the Tangle format would be something people really enjoy, where it's a quick 5-minute breakdown of an issue with a view from the left and a view from the right, and then my perspective. So yeah, I have plans to expand this into different media platforms. I have a small team now that I'm hoping to take care of and sort of grow with them. And yeah, I think I do a ton of work to produce this daily newsletter, and I leave a lot on the table by not repurposing the content that I already have. That's like a big goal of mine for 2021 is, I have 4,000 words, 3,000 words of writing every day that just exists as a newsletter that I could cut up and condense and turn into a podcast. I could turn it into a YouTube video. I could do all these other things with it. And I'm leaving a lot on the table in that respect. So I think the heart of it will always be the newsletter, but I'd love to get my toes wet in some of those other platforms.
More with Isaac Saul about the emerging digital media platform space after this. Stay with us. Act 3. Whose audience is it anyways? Used to be news media outlets used print publications, terrestrial broadcast signals, and distribution as a barrier to entry against competitors. Now, technology has spawned a new breed of digital-first companies, and the surviving incumbents were essentially forced to pivot just to stay alive. So now we've got this new breed of digital media platform players, and they basically provide infrastructure to content creators, and in your case, journalists / content creators who want to hang a shingle and launch their own masthead, so to speak. Isaac Saul founded and runs the nonpartisan news ad-free political newsletter Tangle. You could have used MailChimp, Constant Contact, or ConvertKit to power your newsletter. Why'd you go with Substack?
Yeah, that's a big question in the newsletter space right now. My thought process was this: I'm good at a few things. I'm really good at writing. I'm really good at interviewing people. I'm really good at research. Those are my strengths, and I wanted to lean into my strengths. I have very low technical capabilities, and I had pretty much no experience in the newsletter space besides existing in newsrooms where other people were sending newsletters and being a newsletter consumer. So I had a good idea and one set of skills to execute that idea, which was kind of the writing, interviewing, research skills. And Substack covered everything else for me. I mean, it first of all gave me a platform to use that I didn't have to build. It was punch and play. I mean, it was so intuitive for me to just click new post and type a few things in and then, blast out an email to my subscribers. That was really easy. 2 was that it had a built-in audience. People were already on the Substack website to read other newsletter creators. And so there was a discover page. I was sharing the platform with other people. So it was easier for people to kind of stumble across my work there than it might have been if I just started my own blog. And 3 was that I believed in the model. I mean, they were and are, I think, distinguishing themselves by doing what they sort of call premium newsletter creation. It's they do not they basically dissuade people from having ads in their newsletter and push people to only do the subscriber model. And what I wanted was to be supported and independent in a way where I had absolutely no ties to investors, had no pressure to create traffic, didn't have advertisers to please. I wanted to be subscriber supported, and Substack was just built for that from top to bottom. It's totally free to use when you build your audience. So I wrote Tangle every day, 4 times a week, 5 times a week for 8 months, totally free without charging anybody a penny, and built my audience up to 3,000 or 4,000 readers. And then I asked people to jump from being free readers to paid readers after about 8 months, once I knew I had a proven concept. And so that whole 8 months on Substack was free. I didn't pay at all to use the platform. And most other platforms charge in order to just be a creator and use their platform. So that was really attractive to me, that it was kind of like this low risk, low investment thing. And they only make money when I make money. So I know they're incentivized to help me make the most money possible, which is like a good shared incentive, since they're just taking a cut of my revenue. I like that model. It made sense to me.
Do you have a personal relationship there, or did you just sign up? Like a lot of these services have these creator programs where there's actually someone managing the community and you have a direct line of communication with that person. Are you in a situation like that?
So I just started my newsletter without talking to anybody there. And then I reached out to them and I got a response from Hamish McKenzie, who is the co-founder of Substack. And we sort of had a phone call where I picked his brain about what my idea was. And he kind of helped guide me towards crystallizing the vision I had for my newsletter, and gave me some tips about how to best use the platform. And through him, I built relationships with a lot of the other people on the Substack team. So today, yeah, I do. I mean, it's not like a coworker colleague relationship, but there are people there, 3 or 4 people on staff who I know will answer my emails when I have an issue, and, will pick up the phone if I need some advice about something or I'm trying to make a big decision. And that wasn't something I was expecting, but it has certainly made me loyal to the platform in a way where I've wanted to stay on, despite the fact, I could make a jump. I mean, I could move to somewhere like Ghost and just take my list and go there. And based on the way the Substack fees are, I could save $20,000 or $30,000 a year by just moving over to Ghost. But then I'm really on my own with a different kind of support system. I mean, Ghost offers support, but it's not the same kind of, you're not tied. They're not tied to my fate the same way Substack is. And I like the fact that they're in it with me.
So, early on in the days of social, there were all sorts of ways to get data in and out of the social networks. Facebook had RSS feeds, you could get to anyone's email address. But, as they get bigger, obviously they clamp down. They see that, user data or that user contact information, in particular, the email address and mobile phone number, if there is one, as their competitive information. And so I had Joe Paluzzi on the show recently. He founded the Content Marketing Institute, and he said, when you build an audience on Clubhouse, you're actually not building your audience, you're building theirs. Ditto for YouTube or Facebook or any of these, LinkedIn. And obviously Substack is just sort of scaling now, so I know you can still get your emails out of there if you want. Do you have any concern about that, a sunset for that?
Yeah, I mean, there are, I think, very good, fair criticisms or concerns about how Substack's going to evolve and what their long-term goals are. I mean, they obviously are going to have a certain kind of data from getting people's emails and payment methods and things like that, that could help them, target users if they wanted to. But my experience so far has been that line has been drawn pretty clearly between them and the creators. I've never gotten, any kind of pushback on anything I wrote or emails sort of nudging me to go one way or the other. It has always felt like they are just operating in the background and I'm using their platform. I think there are some growing pains with that. I'll give you one good example. I was sitting around on a Sunday afternoon a few weeks back, and I started getting a notice that 10 or 15 people had canceled their subscriptions to my newsletter totally out of the blue. And I couldn't understand, I couldn't figure out what was going on. I never get more than like one cancellation a day. I have a really low churn rate. It's like one of my pride things. And so I'm freaking out, trying to figure out what's going on. I start reaching out to some of these readers, just emailing them, hey, I just noticed you unsubscribed. Can you tell me what's going on? And then they tell me that they had gotten a notice from Substack that their subscription was going to renew. Their yearly subscription was coming up on the 1-year renewal, and they didn't want it to renew. So they canceled the subscription. And then I asked one of them to forward me the email, and I saw the email, and it was like just this very generic, hey, this is the Substack team. We just want to let you know your subscription to Tangle is renewing in 5 days. Like, you can change your subscription methods here. And it's like a link to their account. And it's basically an invitation to unsubscribe. And I didn't turn this thing on. It's just Substack doing their standard due diligence to not sneak charge people. But I wrote to them, pissed off, saying like, hey, first of all, don't contact my readers without my permission. I didn't know this email was going out. And second of all, if it's going to go out, I want to be in control of what it says, And so in like 48 hours, they turned around an update where I could edit that email message they sent and sort of customize how far in advance it went out and put like a personal message in there. It says, hey, this is Isaac Saul. We don't want to sneak charge you, just letting you know your renewal is coming up. We need your support more than ever. Please stay with us. And it stopped being, kind of the invitation to unsubscribe. And I saw the churn rate just go down immediately once I changed the email message. So, that's something like, they're a growing platform, and that kind of stuff is expected. They fixed it really quick. They updated a feature, directly in response to my request. And I come out of that feeling like I have a positive experience with them. Like that was a frustrating thing to happen, but in the long term, I lost 10 subscribers and I changed the platform forever in a positive way that I'm going to benefit from. And so, there's some upside to being able to grow with them in that way, even if it's a little rough and tumble here and there.
Isaac, if someone wants to subscribe to Tangle, how can they do it?
You can go to readtangle.com. And when you go there, you'll be prompted to drop in your email, and you can do that for free and try it if you want. But, if you like what you hear or like the idea, you can also throw your weight behind it with a subscription. And if you subscribe, you'll get, on top of the Monday through Thursday editions, you'll get Friday editions, which are typically deep dives, personal essays, interviews with people in the political world. It's sort of like that extra premium original content, which people really love.
Isaac Saul, founder of Tangle, the political newsletter. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Eric.